Going to start in just a second. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, and welcome to our 5th webinar of this year. So this webinar was supposed to be about candidates and the coverage in the media of those candidates. But with everything going on right now and with so many student requests coming in, we've decided to shift the focus just a little bit. So again, apologies that this is pre-recorded, but we're not allowed up in the studio right now, so we're having to do it this way. And our webinar today is going to be, what are we so afraid of? So our presenters today are going to be...
I'm Allegra Davis-Hanna. I teach English for TC Connect, and I'm the Department Chair for Humanities. Hi, everyone.
And I'm Angela Thurman, and I teach economics, both macro and micro, at TCC Connect. Good morning.
And I'm Misty Wilson-Mertens. I'm the Department Chair of Social Sciences, and I teach history, but I'm just hosting today.
You're the Vanna White.
Well, no, I'm not the Vanna White because I have a speaking part. I'm the Pat Sajak.
I guess that makes me the wheel.
Can you tell us, what do you think our fears right now are being shaped by?
So I will start by saying this is not based on psychological research. This is based on sociological research. The difference being it's surveys and discussing with people. It's not like a scientific, psychological, or psychiatric investigation. So I just want to make that distinction first.
So this is mostly anecdotal research?
It's not anecdotal. It's just a different kind of research. So it's still academic, quantitative research that's done by universities, but it's sociological as opposed to a psychologist investigating like the mechanisms of our brains.
Okay.
So our fears primarily are shaped by what we read, watch, and listen to, and that doesn't just refer to the news. It also refers to novels that we read, horror movies that we might watch, regular TV show. If you watch a lot of medical dramas, you might start to develop increased fear of things that have to do with medical purposes. They all are also shaped by what you believe. So your belief system, your morality, your religion, all of those things can help shape what we are afraid of and who you trust. Obviously, who you trust determines who you distrust, who you're skeptical of, and who you're anxious about. So the questions that you have to ask yourself is whether the sources of information, the things that you take in, whether they're clouding or clearing your understanding of the world around you. Because most of our fears are not going to come true, right? And that doesn't mean that we're dumb for having fears or anxieties. It just means that we have to make sure that we are basing our thoughts and our feelings on reality and not on something closer to paranoia. You have to ask who's invested in making you feel. That sentence does not make any sense. I don't know who typed that, but it was not me. I'm just kidding. It was totally me. You have to think about who's invested in making you feel more fear or anxiety. So are people trying to sell you something? Are people trying to convince you to vote for them? And this, likewise, who's invested in downplaying risks? So does it make someone look better to make it seem like something isn't really happening, if that makes sense? And I'm mostly now talking about politicians or companies that have a lot of power in sales. So who's invested in making you feel more afraid and who's invested in downplaying risks to an unrealistic degree? And those are questions that you have to answer on your own using things that we've talked about in webinars before, right? Information literacy, considering your sources, checking facts, looking up a news story in 3 different places to see how the bias is being reflected, asking other people outside of your circle of people who agree with you, asking your instructors, doing academic research. You have to figure out whether your normal sources of information are giving you a healthy, rational amount of fear, because certainly, for instance, we're all staying home because we don't want to catch or spread a coronavirus. That's a healthy response to fear. But if you've bought, I don't know, 250 packs of toilet paper, you might have gone to the unhealthy level of fear. I don't know how much toilet paper you've purchased, and I don't want to know.
So you bring up a point about sources, and I think that's a really important point. How does the source or the news that we consume affect our outlook and what we do?
So when we say sources, we have, and if we're speaking specifically about what's happening now, we have two sources of information. We have official sources, right? So that's political leaders at the state, local, and national level, and scientific leaders. So we have the people who are giving information, and then we have the news media who's sending that information to us. And the role of the news media is not to act as a filter and is not to direct our attention in one way or another, but is to help us understand what the messages mean and which messages are true and which messages are not. So you are looking for news that has a healthy level of skepticism regarding every person in power. Does that make
But
sense?
you don't believe that all news sources are going to do that?
I don't believe that. No, I don't think that very many popular news sources have a healthy level of skepticism toward all people in power. A lot of news sources have almost none, and a lot of news sources have too much, right?
So how can I determine if I'm looking at a healthy source of news or if I am in an echo chamber?
It's a great question. So look for balanced, factual news. And when I say factual, I mean, think about the words that are being said and used and see if they're focused on facts or if they're focused on opinion or analysis instead. And this can be hard. It's hard for all of us to critically examine sources that we have been depending on for a long time. So some news stories are inflammatory or frightening. And so you might
On purpose, you mean?
right. You might say all news stories now are inflammatory or frightening, but I mean, they are intended to inflame or frighten. They're not intended to provide you with news. And right now, a lot of the news is by itself kind of scary. But some stories are intending to inflame or frighten. Some stories are neutral and generally informative. And so they may be scary because scary things happen sometimes, but they're not designed to inflame the situation or make it worse. Some news stories are designed to be happy. They're designed to be diversions from what's really happening. They're designed to attract people to the news source, to make them feel good, to remind us that good things happen in the world. And some stories are biased, opinionated, or subjective. And all news agencies have opinion sections, right? All newspapers have an opinion section. All news channels have analysis programming. So it's not that news agencies shouldn't have any opinionated information, but again, we're looking for a balance.
So when you're talking about the happy sources, you're not saying that that's bad, right?
No.
But just balance it.
Exactly. If
Okay.
if a news agency is reporting mostly happy stories, then go back to that question: are they invested in diverting my attention from what's really happening into focusing on all of these good things?
So it's okay if I go read a story about a dog that like tracked down their owner across 16 miles. That's fine. As long as I'm also aware of what's happening in the world.
Yes. Yes.
Can you show us some examples?
I can. So on the same day, within about a 5-minute period, I took a screenshot of the front page of major news organizations' websites. And I'm just going to draw, and hopefully I took off all of the identifying markers. So we're not going to talk about any particular news source itself, but I just want to show you some examples. Also, my dog is about to start barking, so if that happens, I'm going to pause myself talking and fix that. So just a warning. So here's a screenshot from a news organization. Again, I took off the name of who it is. So I want you to pay attention to a few things. One is some of this phrasing that does seem inflammatory, but maybe is neutral because things are kind of not great right now. But in particular, right, the word finally here is making a little bit of commentary. Staff at New York Hospital where nurse died will finally get coronavirus testing. So it's a little bit, right? But mostly we have a balance. We have a story about, Palm Sunday and how people are creating virtual church services that's designed to make people happy. We have factual information about, again, it's not a happy story, but factual information about what's going on in the world. And then we have a little bit of opinion. They're calling it analysis, but that means opinion in the news. Okay. And then we have these stories over here, which are mostly factual based, but the headlines are inflammatory, and that's almost kind of clickbait, right?
So I want to ask you about that.
Okay.
So the Surgeon General did use the phrase Pearl Harbor moment.
He did.
So putting that in quotes in a headline, do you feel like that is still inflammatory? Should that be in the story rather than in the headline?
I do, because if that comment is put in context, it is less frightening than when it's in this headline. So I feel like the story is factual, and if you read the story, if that were a live link and we clicked it, we opened the story, it would be a factual story. It would be a well-written news piece. The problem here is the headline. The headline is designed to be a little salacious and get me to click on it, because Pearl Harbor moment is scary, especially if you are familiar with Pearl Harbor, right? So he did say it. It's true, but the focus on the worst part of it in the headline is problematic. The same with the Dr. Fauci story right underneath it. So this is actually not bad. It's pretty good for the front page of a news organization's website, because again, their job is to report the news, but their second job is to get you to click on things so they can sell ads, which is how they keep the website running. This is a different news organization. You can see I'm getting an advertisement for Canvas down here. So a lot of similar stories, because I took these at the same time. But this has a more positive focus, because they're focused on the Queen delivering this inspirational address. And we have a story about Victory Gardens in the bottom right. So that's designed to be like, we're, persevering and we're doing this together. This is a great example of a very neutrally written headline. So this is something that happened. This doesn't have added inflammatory language. It just says UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson hospitalized due to coronavirus. Now, is that a scary thing that happened? Yes. Did they write that headline to be extra dramatic? No.
So it could have been UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson on death's door.
Exactly.
Yeah, fighting for his life.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah.
Or just like right over here, coronavirus's crushing impact on small business in America. Crushing is a pretty dramatic word, right? It is a negative impact for sure, but put that information in context in a larger story so that we don't just get freaked out by all these crazy headlines.
It's interesting to me, I guess because I teach history, that the previous one had Pearl Harbor and this one has Victory Gardens. And both of these are a comparison, of course, to World War II.
Yeah,
it's just a very dramatic time in our history to be comparing ourselves to.
I think a lot of people are making that comparison, actually, so that's interesting. All right. I feel like it's obvious who this is from, even though I cut off the logo. So again, we have a lot of factual based messaging, but we still have we have this Pearl Harbor moment in the headline. We still have some clickbaity things here. And then we have some opinion pieces, and so they're identifying them. This is just like analysis, opinion. That's a responsible way to identify that you're getting opinionated information, so that you don't think it's the same thing as the news. So this is one person's opinion. Over here we have analysis. So this represents a pretty good balance of factual information.
Why are you pointing to Tiger King?
I just wanted to point at it.
Okay.
Just, shout out to Joe Exotic.
And then
we have one positive story down here, which is how you're going to get your money. What'd you say, Misty?
The Tiger King is in jail in Fort Worth, in case anybody was wondering.
Whoa, I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I should go visit him.
You can't.
Not right now.
People, it's quarantine, Angela.
That's right.
So I will tell you right now, the picture on this screen is designed to be inflammatory because this is just like the most dramatic, frightening, horrifying picture. So
when I'm balancing my news, I should also look at the images.
Yes. And then you have to say who has a vested interest in making this look better than it is, right? So people managing the crisis have a vested interest in making it look like it's not that bad. But news agencies that are critical of the administration have a vested interest in making it look as bad or worse than it is. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is obvious to me, a news agency, well, and you see Rachel Maddow at the bottom, so it's obvious what it is. But this is obviously a news agency that has more than a healthy level of skepticism about the current administration. They have basically an open criticism of the current investigation. We still have a lot of factual news. We still have some opinion pieces down here. But again, this picture is inflammatory, and we have the Pearl Harbor inflammatory comment over there.
You know, something else that's interesting about this, instead of just saying Maddow's take, it's Maddow to Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting way to flip what is an opinion piece, right?
Yeah.
To make it look like it's more news than opinion.
Yeah. And when you say it like that, then it's adversarial, and that draws even more eyeballs, because then it's like, now it's smack talk instead of just opinion pieces. It's all designed to get you to look at it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this news site has an abundance of stories that are designed to be positive. And just as you said before, positive news is good, and we need a balance so that we don't get bogged down in the negative. But not only do we have stories that seem almost cherry picked, so we're going to look at 1,000 people, one of them is doing something really good, and we're going to take that story and emphasize it to make it look like things are better than they are. So this, I think, would represent a news agency that has less than a healthy level of skepticism about the current administration. Does that make sense? The previous had
so one is like too much and one is not enough.
Not enough. Yes.
So we're looking for like the Goldilocks.
Exactly. And in fact, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 places where this is almost complementary of the president or the current administration. Instead of just having positive feel-good stories, which are these green arrows, these smaller orange ones are designed to prop up and complement the administration. And we have very little basic news information. Of course, they're live streaming. I think halfway through my taking of screenshots, the live press conference started. So the live stream is neutral because that's just the information being disseminated. And then down here, we have a real neutrally stated news story about Boris Johnson.
And again, if I'm only looking at one set of news, if it's the previous one, I'm probably in a state of panic. And if it's this one, I maybe think, well, it's not that big a deal.
Maybe I don't need to stay home.
So balance would be important.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is the last one. So we have mostly neutrally presented news stories, one kind of feel-good story, and one quote brought out of context to make it a little, to point out at least how dramatic things are the hardest and saddest week, right? But that is even actually, that's a part of the same statement of the U.S. Surgeon General where he talked about the Pearl Harbor moment. So they didn't take the most salacious quote. It's a little more neutral there. But as you see, the headlines are being phrased neutrally, so they're not designed to inflame. They're not designed to tamp it down or to make it look better than it is. We have a feel-good story, but we don't have too many. We don't have any analysis or opinion. So this is kind of what you're looking for. And you just have to be very neutral when you look and say, where's the healthy level of skepticism of the people in power?
Okay.
So going beyond news.
Yeah.
And media, where do we get our fears?
So I'm going to need your help on this, Misty.
Oh, good.
So common fears, and I'm not talking about a person's fear of clowns. Okay.
Which
So societal fears.
yeah.
Right.
I'm
So
not afraid of clowns. I just don't like them. How about that? And I don't like mimes either.
I don't think anyone likes mimes, but yeah, so if we talk about culturally common fears, not individual fears, but as a society, our common cultural fears,
So in 2020, very few of us are afraid of being hexed by a witch.
Right. So these are all a list of things that we used to be more afraid of than we are now. Witchcraft, communism, Satanism and satanic cults, right? Serial killers, nuclear meltdowns, even terrorism. If you think about 20 years ago, we were more afraid of terrorism than we are today. Now, doesn't mean some of these aren't real threats, right? Murderers are scary. We don't want to be in a nuclear meltdown, but these are not things that we're constantly talking about as a culture of being afraid of. And hopefully none of us are afraid of being hexed by a witch. As a contrast,
yeah, these are historical context issues.
Those are things we used to be afraid of. And as a contrast, we didn't really used to be afraid of climate change. You probably remember the late 80s, early 90s when we were really concerned about the ozone layer.
I remember Captain Planet, that cartoon. Yeah.
And then really starting in about mid 2000s, we started to grow our fear about climate change. So that doesn't mean that any of these fears are rational or irrational. We're just talking about how fears change over time culturally. I think the climate is something that everyone should be concerned about. There's a study, Chapman University does a study every year since 2014 of America's most common fears and how they change over time. And so this one with the clown, you're welcome, Angie.
Thank you.
Is from 2014. And you see a lot of these are really personal, right? I'm afraid of walking alone at night. I'm afraid of identity theft. I'm afraid of getting ill or losing my job. I'm afraid of clowns. I'm afraid of being a victim of a crime. So a lot of those are really about I'm afraid something really bad's going to happen to me.
Well, and those seem rational. Most of them seem like rational fears.
Yeah, as long as they don't keep you from doing daily life activities.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, and then in 2015, people started to have more broad level focus when we talk about things that they were afraid of. So corruption of government officials, cyber terrorism, corporate tracking of personal information. So that's data on the internet, terrorism, government tracking of personal information, biowarfare, identity theft, economic collapse. But we still have some personal ones, right? Running out of money in the future, credit card fraud. So as you see, it just changes over time what people are more afraid of. And I'm sure if they did a study today, almost everyone would have the same fear.
Yep.
Snakes.
Just kidding. Not all snakes are bad snakes.
Just kidding. It's the coronavirus. And we're not going to read all of them, but this is just designed to show you it just changes over time, right? And we have this balance between broad level and personal level problems. Some of these are related to climate. Some of them are related to having money. Some of them are related to social unrest. But they change. And they change in response to what's happening around us, and they change in response to us gaining new information. So sometimes, like in the case of witchcraft, right? We gained new information and understanding of the world, and we became less afraid of witches. But sometimes we gain more information, and that causes us to gain more fear. So the more we learn about climate change, for instance, we might become more and more afraid of something bad happening regarding that.
Right.
So we want a healthy balance of information so that we know what to be aware of, what to look out for, what to guard against, but also not to be so afraid that we don't leave the house. Although right now you should not leave your house. But
for essential things.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the last year they did a study is 2018. They don't have 2019 data yet. So this is where people were the last time they did the study, and they color coded it for you. So is it governmental, environmental, economic, or related to illness and death?
Huh. Most is environmental.
Most is environmental. Yes.
Then I'm going to guess that black bar, those two black bars are probably going to rise when we do this study again.
Yes. So if we did the study right now, these two black bars would be the largest for sure. Is my guess. Yes, because there's a pandemic. I'm not sure if you guys know.
Yeah.
And so these are the top 100 fears, and really I just want to show you that a lot of them are timely. So if we think about things that are in purple, right, those are things that are really related to modern living. And if we look at things that I put in green, those are things that are really the last 10, 15 years, right? Or at the very least in your lifetime, these became fears. We didn't used to be afraid of identity theft, for instance. And before we had cars, we weren't afraid of drunk drivers. But I'm pretty sure not having money, fear of heights, theft of property, those are fears from all time. So a lot of these change based on what's happening culturally, technological innovation, gaining information. You don't see witchcraft anywhere on here.
It would be interesting to see how the percent that are afraid of these would compare to the percent that actually experience them. So, I mean, many of us are probably afraid of snakes or sharks, right? But how many of us are ever actually going to be bitten by a snake or a shark?
Yes. Not me, because I'm not going anywhere near them.
Right. It's really easy to avoid sharks, right?
Yeah.
A little harder to avoid a snake.
And that's the kind of research they do in psychology. Why are you afraid of being killed? Is it because you know someone who was? Is it because you watch too much CSI? Is it because your parents were afraid of it? Is it because you live in a dangerous area? Is it because you're just generally paranoid? Right? That's the kind of thing that psychologists research is why does an individual person become afraid of something? You will notice that this is from 2018 and pandemic or major epidemic was number 32.
Huh.
Right, because we had SARS by that point. We had bird flu. Were we in the middle of Ebola at that point? It's hard to remember.
Ebola didn't last long in our country.
Well, for us, yes.
Yeah. So
that's true. And I would like to point out, you just mentioned swine flu and the bird flu, H1N1 in 2008-9, there were 12,500 deaths in the US alone. So just to sort of put things in perspective, people die from the flu in numbers like 30,000 a year from the flu and complications of the flu. So I just want to warn people, I see all these fears, but if you let your fears get the best of you and just shut yourself up in the house and say, well, I'm not going to ever go outside and I'm wearing a mask and I'm wearing gloves and I'm never going to see anybody because I'm so afraid of everything, then you're just going to miss out. You can't let your fears dictate your behavior.
I mean, you can right now because the government's advising us to stay home. But yeah, when, in 2 months or 3 months, we can't continue to be afraid of what was a crisis now, right? And the other thing is, right, if you have an extreme irrational fear of something, it does keep your attention away from things that you should have a healthy fear of, right? So you should, be aware of your surroundings when you're in a parking garage. Does that mean it's likely that someone is going to attack you? No, but you should be aware of your surroundings. Should that fear keep you from ever going shopping or ever leaving your house? No. And that's when it's a serious problem that you need, a psychiatrist's help with. But anyway, the point of this slide was to show you that a lot of fears that we experience culturally are related to modern living, and they rise and fall based on cultural events.
So taking those two things together, talking about the news that we consume and also looking at the fears that we have, is there a correlation between those two things?
So what's interesting is that this fear study at Chapman University actually did some demographic research in 2017, 2018. And so they asked people, in addition to what they're afraid of, they gathered demographic information, their age, their sex, their race, and their political affiliations. And so they did find that conservatives and liberals tended to be afraid of different things. And that, I think, is very interesting because that gets to the heart of political difference, right? We all want the same things, right? We all want safety. We all want safety for our families. We all want to have enough money to live comfortably. We all want to take care of our health needs. We all want education. We all want jobs, job security, right? We all want the same things for the most part, but we're afraid of different things.
True.
So conservatives tended to be most afraid of, and obviously this is not every single conservative, but tended to be more afraid of Islamic extremism, Obamacare, and gun control. And liberals tended to be more afraid of Trump care, which I think is a reference to Trump changes to Obamacare, anti-immigrant groups, and white supremacist groups. So this, I think,
was 2017 the latest time they had that data?
They did this survey in 2017, and it's their 2018 study. Yes, that's the last time they did it.
Okay. I'll be interested to see how that changes in the next couple of years.
And again, we have to remember that politicians and biased or partisan media outlets get attention by appealing to fears of target groups. So if I'm convincing you to vote for me, I can convince you that I am, and if you're afraid of Obamacare, then I'm anti-Obamacare, right? And I'm going to give you 100 reasons that you should be more afraid of it, and then say, but I can fix it.
Yeah.
Or if you're afraid of Trump care, then you can say, here's why you should really, really be afraid of what Trump's doing to healthcare, but I can fix it.
Yeah.
So they have a vested interest in making people more afraid of specific things and then saying, but I can fix it. And then you'll vote for them because they can fix it.
True. And, you know, I find it interesting. Even that photo that you have here is biased, obviously. We're better than this. So I don't even know what this person is protesting, but the implication is that what I believe is I have higher moral ground than whatever you believe. My beliefs are better than your beliefs. And I just think that's so interesting because that's pretty much the one way to not bring someone over to your way of thinking is by telling them, you know, hey, not only are you wrong, but you're a terrible person because you don't believe the way I believe.
And as you said, that happens on both sides. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about fear and we've talked about the idea of party affiliation, but let's see a specific example.
So this is a chart that is specific to being skeptical or afraid of people who are Muslim. And
I'm just gonna let you know right now, I hate the colors on this chart.
I didn't make it.
I know you didn't make it, but I hate the colors.
So these are the percentages of people who agreed with or were comfortable with these statements. So do you agree that Muslims should have extra screening at the airport? Do you agree that they're more likely to be terrorists? Do you agree that we should increase police presence in Muslim majority neighborhoods? Do you think we should stop Muslim immigration? Would you be comfortable with the mosque being in your own neighborhood? And as you see, this is, by the way, from 2016. So it's not super old, but it's not yesterday. It's different based on your political party.
Which is probably also going to indicate that it's different based on the news you consume or the beliefs you have. Because we're using one as a proxy for the other.
Yes.
That's interesting. All right, so up to this point, we've talked about rational, good information. What happens when I just get bad information?
So the bad thing about the internet is, well, one bad thing about the internet is when there's more sources, you can hunt around for a source that agrees with you, and then you can go down a rabbit hole of information that feeds into you. And in fact, the system is now designed because browsers and social networks track what you click on, and they will drive you to content you like in order to get you to click on it. Yeah. So if you read two sources if you read 2 things about vaccinations and how wonderful they are and how they help save lives, then you'll be driven to more content that's similar. But the reverse is also true.
So then I become very entrenched in my beliefs.
Yes.
Because I have all of this data that supposedly indicates that I'm right.
Right. And the perception is there's all of these sources that agree with me, when the fact is, I mean, I can find 100 sources that would tell you the earth is flat. The number of people who say it does not make it any more or less true, right? So
Right.
you have to get information from multiple types of sources, and you have to trust experts, real experts, not Joe Bob who has a telescope who thinks that he can tell the earth's flat because he used a telescope to look across the ocean. Okay? Actual scientific experts. And you have to be willing to read stories that don't confirm your current beliefs, right? Because that's confirmation bias. You have to be willing to accept things that challenge your beliefs. And you have to be aware of your own biases. Everyone, even the most moral, righteous among us, have biases. And so we have to be aware of them, even if we can't necessarily entirely get rid of them, to avoid going down this rabbit hole of misinformation.
True. And, one thing I'd like to throw in, and I'm going to go back to COVID just because that's what's going on. I gave my students an example of, we would watch a little clip and I would say, where is this information coming from? Where is this person getting their information? And then we would go back to a reputable source, which in this case is the CDC. So I was saying, if you're going to be wanting factual information, go to a non-biased source, or if you can't find a non-biased source, at least read something from the left, something from the right, something from your point of view, something from an opposite point of view, because a lot of these things that look totally reputable are not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially right now, there's all this information out, like you said, Allegra, it's very inflammatory. And of course, what is the purpose? They want you to read what they've written. So if they don't make it inflammatory, you're not going to click on it. So I'm telling my students, make sure to go to a source like the CDC. It is not written in exciting terms, but it's factual.
Right.
And so I think that's just so interesting. And also, and this applies for a lot of older people, but also people that may not be really knowledgeable about looking for information. Sometimes there will be a source that will look like the source that you're looking for, but it isn't. So
so there might be a fake CDC website or something like that. Yeah. And the thing is, the CDC and the World Health Organization are great sources of information for what's happening now. But when you're reading news stories, look at, are they quoting people from the CDC? Are they in agreement with what the CDC is saying? Or do they have a bias one way or the other? Are they making it seem worse? Are they making it, are they playing it up? Or are they playing it down? So definitely check with neutral organizations like that to get information. And then you have to talk about, or you have to think about your fears versus reality.
So how scared should I be?
So what you should do in a time of crisis is listen to experts. And experts are doctors right now, right? Those are the people that we should be listening to, is medical doctors.
And researchers.
The CDC, the World Health Organization, or people who have studied disease and they understand how, your human body works. And it's hard to tell someone you're wrong for being afraid, right? So everybody has little anxieties or things they're afraid of, a phobia. You're not afraid of clowns, but you don't like them. And so most people probably have some irrational fears, meaning that I'm more afraid than I should be based on my level of exposure, right? Are there snakes in my suburban neighborhood? No. So do I really need to worry about snakes all the time? No. And even if I found one, is it going to hurt me? Probably not. But I would also not like it if someone said you're wrong and dumb for being afraid of snakes, right? I just am. That's how I am. Okay. So you just have to be aware of how different your fears are from reality. I can tell you rationally, it's probably not going to happen. I'm probably never going to get bit by a poisonous snake. And you have to think, who's invested in stoking and creating fear for attention, votes, or ad dollars? Who's invested in creating a fear and convincing people that they can fix it? Right? So we talked in a previous webinar about how crime rates are actually going down, but the perception is that they're going up. Part of the reason that perceptions are going up is because politicians like to say, I'm going to fix crime. Crime's bad. You should be afraid of crime, but I'm going to fix crime, right? So you just have to be aware that your perceptions are not objective. You saw a shark once. That doesn't mean sharks are going to all come out and get you, right?
They're not personally attacking you.
And your perception is limited to the things you can see with your own two eyeballs. And so the broader research and relying on experts is a much better strategy for trying to deal with a healthy or develop a healthy level of fear.
So we have these fears, they're intuitive, whatever, we're born with them maybe. How does this messaging that we've received affect those fears?
So it takes us back to the news. What they choose to focus on, avoid, or emphasize can either mitigate it or worsen it. And I chose a scary picture. The other thing you have to remember is that rare things catch your attention, right? So the Victory Garden, that's a rare thing because I've never seen one. So it's a positive thing that's rare and it caught my attention. But rare, scary things are really going to catch our attention. And if you read about one crazy, rare, scary thing happening, you might be afraid of it's going to happen to you, but it's rare. So again, your perception is being shaped by what you take in. You just have to be aware of what people's motives are.
Again, this is from a previous webinar we did, but I like the point you have on here, watching too much news affects you. I think it was, 2 hours was the cutoff?
Yeah, so there's a point where you're underinformed and you don't have enough awareness about what's going on around you, but there's also a point where you become overexposed. And right now, in a time like this, being overexposed to the news can increase your level of fear exponentially. If all you hear about all day long is people dying, then you will be sad, stressed out, anxious, depressed, maybe angry, right?
So
do you have to watch every press conference every day? No.
There's another thing.
Read a summary, you know?
Yeah. This applies directly to any of our listeners who are investors. It's always advertised, like, do not be checking your investments now because it'll depress and freak you out. And then you'll do something unwise like panic sell and try to time the market, which never works. If you're listening to this, it never works. If you know how to time the market, call me, please, because that is an awesome thing. But that's another thing about getting too much news. So enough news, appropriate news, totally appropriate. But focusing on, fretting on, stressing on is going to make you anxious.
I mean, just check yourself.
Yeah.
Is watching it making you feel more stressed out? Then just turn it off.
And I want to add on here, Twitter.
You can read and that's the other, right? The internet is just full of idiots.
Yep.
So
that know everything.
You know, I've been in my house for basically a month now, and I've read a lot of things on the internet, and I can say pretty decisively there's a lot of idiots out there.
Yeah. So what should I do?
Well, you should argue with people on Twitter. I think that's the most healthy response.
I don't feel like that is. I feel like that's wrong.
It's not. And to Angie's point, all of these recommendations, because I'm not a doctor or a psychologist, come from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. They are a research organization. I also try to put some calming pictures on these slides. So first, know what fear and anxiety feel and look like. If you're not a person who has a chronic anxiety condition, then you might not be super familiar with what it feels like to be anxious. And if you are a person with a chronic anxiety condition, then you need to be extra careful, right? So if you are afraid constantly or worrying constantly, if you can't sleep or can't eat normally, if you have difficulty sleeping, concentrating, finishing tasks, if you have chronic health conditions like asthma and the symptoms are getting worse and worse, or if you find that you want to drink more or you want to smoke more, those are some signs that you are experiencing excess levels of fear and anxiety.
So these are all things I should just be mentally kind of taking an inventory of.
Yes, just
Okay.
check yourself basically and say, it has been hard for me to sleep. I am having trouble finishing tasks. Now, it's probably hard for most of us to finish tasks because our children are in our house all day long, but just are you feeling noticeably different? Some things you can do to support yourself. Number one from the CDC, take breaks from watching, reading, or listening to the news. And I will tell you personal experience, I was having trouble sleeping. And so I just told my husband, we can't watch the news after we eat dinner. Like, can't read it, can't look at it. No breaking news story is going to happen at 8 p.m. So just take some time before I try to go to bed to not be constantly thinking about death tolls and all of that. Take care of your body, deep breaths, stretches, meditation, healthy food, sleep. We all know healthy food and exercise, drink water, those kinds of things. Avoid, challenging as it might be, excess use of alcohol or drugs. Do things that you enjoy. So if you like drawing, coloring, sewing, crochet, things that you can do in your house while we are on orders to stay at home, practice doing those things. Talk to other people. If you have FaceTime or Skype, then connect face-to-face when you can and focus on what you can control. So you can't control pandemics, but you can control, what you do with your time.
Okay, so what about those of us who are parents? We're taking care of ourselves, but how do we take care of our kids?
So first you have to look in kids and teens for signs that they are experiencing excess stress, anxiety, or fear. So that's excessive crying if kids are younger, returning to things that they've outgrown. If they tell you that they're worried or sad, if they are also not eating or eating too much. And I know it's hard to identify what's a normal sleeping habit for a teenager, but abnormal sleeping habits, irritability and acting out, or school performance is kind of hard to gauge if they're not in school. Difficulty with attention and concentration, really changes to their behavior that are clear. Avoiding things that they used to enjoy, unexplained headaches or body pain, or if they start using or abusing alcohol and tobacco, which would be hard for them to do because they never leave your sight. But ways to support them, talk to them about it, answer questions, and share facts.
In an age appropriate way, right?
Yes. And parents best know what's age appropriate for their own child, but share facts. Don't share interpretations. Don't share analysis. Share facts. Reassure your child that they're safe. Let them know it's okay to be upset. Let them know it's okay to have feelings. Share with them how you deal with your own stress. I'm afraid too. Here's how I deal with it. Limit their exposure to news coverage. So if you are a family that has the news on in the background all day, consider limiting people's exposure to news. Children may misinterpret what they hear, and again, they're going to focus on the stories that they hear because they have a limited range of experience. So don't expose children to things that they may misinterpret. Try to keep up with routines. That's a big piece of advice that a lot of people have for kids. Your schools are closed, but try to create some type of schedule. Of course, you don't have to be rigid, right? You don't have to freak out if you're 20 minutes late for something or you spent too much time playing, but some kind of routine, just so that routine is important for kids because they know what to expect next. Be a role model. So do healthy things yourself. Take breaks, sleep, exercise, eat well, talk to people, manage your own stress in a healthy way so that your children aren't exposed to you freaking out.
That's good advice.
And it's hard, right? Because you're all within range of each other all the time. So it's hard sometimes to get a private moment. but be aware when your kids can see you that you're a role model for them, for sure.
So we're going to switch gears here just a little bit. Our series this semester has been a little disjointed, as life.
Everything.
But we did ask in previous surveys if anybody had any questions that they wanted us to answer. And we got quite a few answers, so we're going to go through and answer these questions.
Okay.
And so all of the presenters welcome to chime in, answer whichever one you think you can. Why didn't all women want the right to vote?
So
I'll let either of you answer this, but then I'll jump in as the historian.
Yeah, no, neither of us is going to answer this. So this goes back to your suffrage question. You said not all women wanted the right to vote.
Right. So there was a lot of reasons for that. Religion and tradition are part of it. Also a lack of education for some women. So change is hard. Anytime you have a major societal change, there's always going to be people that are early adopters, people that just kind of go with the flow, and the people who would drag their heels. As a drag the heels person, I understand that.
Well, I think that also, I think we see some of this today. Like when we've all seen people where you think for perhaps domestic abuse or something like that, and you're like, well, why would the woman not leave? And a lot of it is self-confidence, is because they don't feel like they have an option. So I think if you look back at that time, and if you have women that were basically raised saying, you don't have any knowledge of this, and it's better to let the men decide this, and they're going to take care of you. I think that would be a very easy thing for a lot of those women to believe and continue to believe.
Yeah, we absolutely have letters of women writing to each other, and one says, I would love to vote, but I don't want a divorce.
It's a paradigm shift, right? Everything changed.
Exactly.
It seemed kind of okay the way it was, so why change it? Why mess with it? And looking back now, it's easy for everyone to say, why wouldn't you want the right to have a say? But it was just
when we were born into that system and we never had to experience the change.
Right. And if somebody else controlled your economic status, right? If there was a man there saying, if you go vote, then you might as well just leave this house. I'm not going to keep you. And you didn't have anywhere else to go, then you're probably going to listen to your husband.
All right, I'm not touching the next one at all, so I'm going to let you two.
So the next question is there a political party that you think has women's rights more in mind than another? If so, how? So I don't think that either major political party, obviously there are more than two, but I don't think either major political party wants to oppress women. I don't think either major political party wants to take women out of the workplace. I don't think people want to pay women less socially. I'm sure lots of bosses do. Do I think that is a political party that has more women's issues in their platform? Sure. That's numerical. That doesn't mean that they care more about women, but it does mean that their particular party platforms identify more ways to help women. But I don't think that's a meaningful distinction. I think really what's important for women is to find a party and a political candidate whose values align with yours and who you think would represent you fairly and speak for you in Congress or from the White House, and for you to vote for that person, and to not vote for that person because their political party affiliates with what you're used to voting for, but because you think they're going to represent you and what you think is important. And if it's really, really important to you to advance certain values or laws or procedures, then that's what you should focus on when you identify who to vote for.
I think that's very well said. And in addition, I would add to that you should never vote for someone based on one thing, which means I would never vote for a woman just because she's a woman. I would not ever go out there and look down the ballot and go, I'm going to vote for every woman, because I don't know that their beliefs are the same as mine. I wouldn't vote for any one race over another. I wouldn't vote for any one ethnic background over another. So to choose one thing and say, I'm going to vote based on this one thing, I think is a little unwise.
Yeah, I mean, if that's what you'd want to do, you're within your rights to do it. But I would advise you to vote for the people who reflect your values and will represent you. The next question.
Hold on. The next question, I had to cut it a little bit.
Yeah.
To make it fit on the slide. So I'm going to read you the full text of the question and you guys can answer. Do you believe small behaviors such as the State of the Union address and Pelosi's visibly being distracted during affect women's vote?
So the broader question is, do I think that the way female politicians behave affects the way women vote? And the answer is sure, of course, yes. But I also think the way female politicians behave affects the way men vote. I think that party is more important than gender for most people when they vote. And do I think that we should have more women in Congress? Absolutely. Does that mean I am not going to vote for someone because of their gender if they represent my beliefs? Probably not. And am I going to not vote because Nancy Pelosi looked bored during the State of the Union? No.
Here, let me ask you a question that this brings up. That the very question implies that we as a society have different expectations of women versus men. Mm-hmm. So my question is, does anyone out there think that a woman in a given office should behave differently than a man? Because this question implies that the expectations for women are different than men, and that in itself is a huge bias.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I mean, women don't have more of an obligation to pay attention, to be agreeable, to go with the flow. Women should be able to take charge of the same types of situations. I mean, I think you're right that the question kind of insinuates that women's behavior should be somehow more controlled than men's. And I agree that the question has a degree of bias to it.
Right.
So
I think everyone should think about the words that they use when they discuss men versus women. So, for example, if a man is a take charge kind of guy, is a woman a take charge kind of gal, or is she bossy and domineering? Right. So a lot of the things that I guess this could be even a hidden bias. Like, did you expect Nancy Pelosi to be more polite? And if so, do you expect the same thing of Donald Trump? Right. If you're expecting something of one person, then you must expect it across the board. You cannot expect women to somehow be different, but at the same time equal in terms of their social behavior when they are in Congress. They should all be held to the exact same standards of behavior.
Right. And if this question is about the State of the Union, then as far as I'm concerned, everybody up there was rude to each other. So do I think that?
No.
Right. So they're all being rude to each other. So do I think that one of them has more of a burden to be polite than the other? No.
Right.
If we're just talking about politeness and behavior. I don't know about the next question, though, because I don't have any information about it. Do you have it, Misty?
I think I'm going to let Angela answer it first, then I'm going to follow her up. Why are women of color the most consistent voters in major elections?
Okay, so here again, we have a question that is written with a bias already in there. And this is great for our students to see, because if you are asked a question, this implies already that women of color are the most consistent voters just because of the way it's written. So I did some research, and that's not exactly true. It all depends on what you consider a woman of color. If you consider a woman of color African American, they're not the most consistent voters. If you consider a woman of color African American plus Hispanic plus Asian, then okay, that group is more consistent. So the way the question is asked is going to determine the answer. Do you group everyone together and say, well, okay, this group is a huge block, but even if you did that, that group, if we group together African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians, they may be consistent voters, but they do not vote in the same way.
Right. Yeah. They're not all voting for the same people.
Exactly.
My
And
guess
that-
would be
yeah, go ahead.
those are people who are probably most likely, or maybe not most, but very likely to experience discrimination of some sort in their daily life, and they may have more of a vested interest in social change. And one good way to enact social change is to vote different people into office.
One other thing I want to throw in here is regionalism. So when you're looking at voter groups, regionalism absolutely is critical, and it really matters when you're talking about people of color.
Well, not only that, but education levels matter as much, if not more.
Yeah.
In the research that I did, it is also wrong. Just like I said, it's wrong to say all women should act like this.
Mhm.
It's also wrong to assume that all women of color vote in this way or value these things. So that group is diverse within itself, and they value different things, and they vote on different issues depending on where they live and what their educational attainment level is.
Yeah. And I think the next question is hilarious. And I'm not criticizing the person who wrote it, because we're just typing words into a form. But more equality is mathematically interesting. But do I think we need more equality? Well, yeah. I mean, I think that we need equality, and we don't have it yet. So I think we need to do more to achieve it. Do I think that everyone, or even a broad spectrum of people, have erased gender bias? No. Do I think women are paid the same as men or recognized equally in the workplace? No. Are there enough female CEOs? No. Are there enough women in powerful positions in universities? No. No, we don't have gender equality, so we do need more of it because we don't have it yet.
Allegra, if there was a podcast you could direct people to answer that question.
Well, Misty, I think I would direct people to the Profess Hers podcast. The hosts are very knowledgeable and interesting, engaging female college professors who talk about these very topics in addition to women in media and popular culture. So I would definitely direct people to the Profess Hers podcast, available everywhere. Please like
and hosted by Misty and Allegra.
Yeah. How much of an impact is my vote? The great thing is, well, I was going to say the same as everyone else's, but then I remembered the Electoral College exists. So in local elections,
it also depends on what kind of election, right?
In local elections, your vote is worth as much as everyone else's. And you know that because people spend a lot of money trying to get your vote.
Your vote is worth as much as everybody else's who votes in a local election. But remember, Betsy Price was elected with less than 4% of people in Fort Worth voting. So your vote matters a whole lot.
Does your vote in the presidential election, if you live in Texas, matter as much as your vote in the presidential election if you live in Ohio? I don't know. That's a question for like a political scientist, a pollster, and a mathematician. But I do know that it matters. And I do know that it matters a lot in local elections. And I do know that states that have been red have changed blue, and vice versa. So we shouldn't say we've voted for a Republican for president for 10 of the last 12 elections, so there's no chance. There's always a chance, but only if you vote, right? So yes, it matters. If you have ever voted for American Idol, then you should be voting in presidential elections. I don't know about the poll tax, Misty, because I don't know about history.
So what happened with the poll tax is in 1965, we have the Voting Rights Act, and that's going to outlaw all barriers to voting, which includes the poll tax, the literacy test, good character clauses, grandfather clause, all of that. So it's a civil rights movement era change.
Okay. We don't know we know the current legal status of the Dreamers, but we don't know the future legal status of the Dreamers. We won't know until the Supreme Court decides that. I believe, and you guys can tell me if I'm wrong, that is before the Supreme Court now, which means, well, I don't know what the schedule.
Well, nothing means anything right now.
Yeah,
Right.
the
Everything
schedule
is on hold.
usually would mean that we would hear about it in June, but I don't know if the Supreme Court's going to convene. I don't think that they're going to
not right now. They're
conduct
not.
the Supreme Court via Zoom. So
Good Lord.
I think
Well-
just like most other things, the schedule is pending a change, and the best way to get the change to happen is for everyone to stay home as long as they can.
Yeah, and given that all of the people on the Supreme Court are in that super high risk era group, I don't think that they even should be meeting.
No.
Nobody is faulting them for staying home.
Got
no.
it.
How about the internet changing political broadcasting? I think
So
that's a really interesting question.
I think we can group those next two questions. The truth is not as much as we thought. So in 2008, right, the election of Barack Obama was impacted greatly by the way he was able to leverage new media, including social media and things like Facebook. But Michael Bloomberg thought he could bet on a strategy of really addressing people through the internet, and it didn't really get him very many votes. So he focused a lot of money on Instagram ads, Facebook ads, and Twitter ads, and he was hard to get away from, but it didn't really matter.
For me, the change that I see is in fundraising. It's so easy now to donate to campaigns that more people are doing it.
That's
and
true.
So we're spending more money on campaigns at like a historic level.
And that is what Barack Obama's campaign really revolutionized was that aspect of it, not really advertising on social media, but using it as a platform for getting donations, even small $2 donations, because those accumulate over time. And campaigning is changed, right? Because it's easier to see where a candidate is on a day-to-day basis, not now because they're in their homes, but I don't know that it's really changed a lot in terms of how we vote, because we're going to get advertised to whether we're watching TV or watching YouTube,
I also think we're right in the middle of it, so it's kind of hard to see the forest for the trees. I think maybe in 20 years we'll have a better grasp on this.
I won't be studying politics in 20 years.
I do agree with Allegra on it. I think it's really affected the grassroots level. Like the people now feel like they can donate like $1 or $2, and it does make a difference. So that has made it, I think, more accessible to the average person.
Now, this is not getting into fake news, false advertising, misleading campaign information, all of that stuff, because number one, we've discussed it in previous webinars, and number two, it would take us an hour to get through it. I think those things have a huge impact, especially when we have people from outside of our country posting that information to persuade voters inside of our country. But in terms of legitimate political campaigning, I think it has had more of an effect on the smaller level. Yeah.
So what's coming up next?
We have one more webinar this semester, and it will be on April 29th. And it is going to be about what we have. Misty, you explain it.
So this is looking at how divided or united are we really? And I think this will be really interesting when we get there to see how people have united around this cause of COVID-19, or how we haven't. I mean, hopefully we do.
Hopefully. But
I'll be
yes,
optimistic.
Focus on what we have in common, shared values, and we have more in common.
What issues do we agree on? Because we actually agree on quite a bit across the board.
Right. On our similarities rather than our differences.
Yes.
Good.
You can tell because Angie and I have agreed on several things during this very webinar.
Which is amazing.
So what you really care about is how to get credit. This video you are watching on YouTube, right below the video in the comment is a link to a Google survey. If you watch this video between Wednesday afternoon and Friday afternoon, then you will have access to the Google link. You fill it out, you include your name, your teacher's name, and all of that information. You're going to answer some questions to make sure that you listened, paid attention, and got information from us today. And then that information will be sent to your instructor. And keep in mind, your instructor may not add extra credit until the end of the semester.
Also on that form is going to be a spot for you to tell us about future webinar ideas. The series that we're doing right now came out of student requests. And the next series we'll do will be fall 2020. So there's probably some big things happening there. Y'all might want to hear some webinars about.
If we get to leave our homes. But yeah, my guess is there's going to be a request for people for us to at least in some degree cover the election. But what other things are you interested in? Or if you are interested in us talking about the election, then what about it? What specific things are you interested in us focusing on? Otherwise, we'll just pick the things that we like.
There you go.
So thank you all very much for joining us. And if you have questions or feedback, please do use that form to let us know or reach out to one of us by email.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.